Ungo Shadows Die Twice is a standalone historical fantasy made by the famous people who also created Dark Souls and Bloodborne. It became an instant hit and garnered massive critical acclaim. You control a broody shinobi called Wolf as he battles entire armies and legendary beasts. One of the many consumables in-game are the sugars: Goku sugar, Ako sugar, Yashariku sugar, Ungo sugar, and Gachiin sugar. These candies are named and colored differently and each offer a different effect. One raises your attack power, another makes you more stealthy, and so on. Today we're going to be recreating these sugars with our own recipe, and true to my tradition when it comes to video game recipes, we're going to be taking our ingredients accurate to the setting, which in this case is Sengoku period Japan. To make our sugars, we'll be infusing a traditional candy base with various ingredients unique for each candy. Each ingredient is based off of TCM, which is an acronym standing for Traditional Chinese Medicine. For those unacquainted with TCM, it can be hard to explain its influence. There's no true Western equivalent because it's more than just old household remedies. It's almost a given that Asian citizens take various TCM practices seriously to a degree, like Westerners do with honey lemon tea or chicken noodle soup. To be a doctor specialized in TCM requires a PhD like any other doctor. It's also accurate to the game. Sekiro takes its setting very seriously. Everything from the weapons, to hairstyles, to interior decor, even down to the kanji on Emma's note is true to the Sengoku period. And some levels go backwards a bit to the Heian period to reflect an ancient atmosphere. You can reasonably minus the historical inaccuracies on your own volition. Giant snake gods, lightning powers, and automatic prosthetic grappling hooks weren't indigenous to Japan. Except there's in fact one tiny detail that you might be surprised to learn is actually anachronistic. Disc-shaped hard candies, the sugars. Hard candies aren't traditional East Asian treats. Sugar was always readily available in the form of sugar cane, true, but sweets almost always took the form of fruit and candy-coated or infused ingredients. This is true worldwide until refining sugar into its white form became common, but East Asia in particular wasn't munching on lozenges while Marie Antoinette already had cough drops. The Sengoku period stretched from the early Renaissance to the Baroque period. While Wolf was paring his way through the Ashina outskirts, the first King James Bible was published. There was plate armor and court gestures, but also firearms and photographs. Japan didn't get access to matchlock firearms until 1542, and since the Sunken Valley clan seems to define themselves by the expert use of these guns, it makes sense that the intro to the game itself dates Sekiro as specifically taking place in the latter years of the Sengoku period. All throughout this stretch of 2 centuries, Japan has been under constant war and political strife, lending to the Sengoku period's alternative name, the Warring States period. Japan consisted of separate nations, all led under daimyo and warlords and various nobles that demanded their armies scramble for more land and resources. Living under this kind of conflict for so long means that innovation and education are rare. There's no opportunity to invent the telescope when you're all constantly worried about your lives. The food of Sekiro would have very much been the same it's been since centuries beforehand. Even though by this point the Columbian exchange was well underway and Europe was experimenting with tomatoes in their food, Japan wasn't enjoying the same golden period. Any developments would have been weaponry, not candy making methods. This means that for our recipe, we're not using anything a Senpo monk wouldn't have access to. No potatoes, corn, vanilla, no beet sugar or fruits that aren't native to Japan. Even though raw cane sugar we're using is pushing the authenticity envelope, because the raw granulated sugar you find in grocery stores aren't completely raw, they've still been refined using lye and carbon to strip much of the molasses. True raw cane sugar, when boiled down from its juice form, makes a traditional Asian ingredient called black sugar, which is very dark in color and not suited for making the brightly colored candy discs that the sugars appear to be. Knowing all that history about the Sengoku period, it's almost silly to see candy consumables in-game looking like they came right out of a bag of Werther's Originals. The developers of Sekiro made many lengths to ensure everything was authentic, so why are the candies so modern looking when they could instead have been a traditional Sengoku period sweet, like something mochi based or agar jellies? The lore behind the sugars are that the evil Senpo monks were mass producing these candies and selling them all across Ashina to fund their crooked child experiments. They're not just presumably tasty, they offer benefits to your health. That's in line with TCM culture and gives us some inspiration for how to pursue replicating them. One important note, the sugars are some of the lesser consumables Wolf can use. Almost all other consumables are better, offering more powerful effects for a longer duration. So, what if these candies were true to TCM and were mere treats infused with medicinal ingredients only capable of giving you a small boost, especially in comparison to the Divine Child's rice, which would be like an EpiPen in this analogy. There's even more depth to the consumables than that. Kuro can give Wolf a sweet rice ball, which is explicitly an ohagi bun, made out of glutinous rice, red beans, and sugar, and it's a traditional offering for the Buddhist observance of the seasonal equinox. Eating it is sometimes said to bring protection. In order for Kuro to make Wolf this rice ball, you gotta give him some of that special rice from the Divine Child. Wolf offhandedly mentions that her rice is sweet when you bite into it, and Kuro realizes that Wolf has been eating these rice grains raw all this time, like the feral 5'5" goblin he is. Kuro vows to give his loyal protector something nice to eat for once, and makes him up to 3 ohagi. The food of Sekiro is symbolic. The Divine Child is able to make rice out of thin air, like a deity of fertility. Kuro takes this divine rice, and his sweet rice ball is more powerful than the magical blessed sugars because it was made with compassion. And eating Kuro's lovingly made rice ball reminds Wolf of once being fed a rice ball when he was young and starving, given to him by his assfuck of a father whose compassion is heavily in question. Emma, also a war orphan, was once given a rice ball by her own adopted father figure. The sugars are described as giving the eater a benediction of power, and who knows what the translators were thinking, but the word choice reminds us of communion and the flesh and blood of Christ. It's not a true comparison. Communion is about replicating and worshiping the Last Supper, reminding Christians about Jesus dying willingly because humans are sinful. Consuming the flesh and blood of Jesus in the form of bread and wine is very different from eating a candy apparently blessed by an ancient Japanese warrior. It's not like communion wafers are supposed to empower you or protect you. Looking at the in-game image of each sugar, you can see the likeness of a person behind it, likely the very warrior the sugars are named after. We don't know if these people actually had a hand in these sugars, somehow transplanting their power into each individual candy, or if the monks just named the candies after them. Either way, the process of receiving the benefits of the sugars isn't just about crunching it between your teeth. Wolf also takes a moment to strike warrior stances, which, according to the descriptions, is a required detail to properly absorb the candy's effects. Observant players will note that the 5 headless boss enemies drop spirit falls, each of which share names with the 5 sugars and offer upgraded versions of their corresponding sugar. Akko's spirit fall is a better version of Akko's sugar, and so on. We can assume that the headless are in fact the very same legendary warriors that powered the sugars, especially since the game itself states that the headless are the undead remains of famed warriors. True to From Software tradition, details are included with purpose, and at the same time, some details are just meant to be taken at face value. The various centipede-themed enemies in Sekiro are associated with kegure, spiritual defilement, death, explaining visually their willing abandonment from Buddhism. But there's likely no lore explaining why Wolf can automatically hoover up all nearby enemy loot like a vacuum with the press of a button. The inexplicable details of From Software games are almost certainly because of gameplay convenience. Many characters are 10 feet tall for no reason, towering over Wolf, who's already short to begin with. Lore-wise, it doesn't make sense for so many completely human characters to be so gratuitously large. Gameplay-wise, it's a lot easier to observe an enemy's telegraph movesets if their model is scaled up, helpful in a game like Sekiro. Buddhist and Shinto traditions can sometimes differ wildly, especially concerning death and karma. Japan's Shinto background describes death, decay, and anything associated with rot as unclean on not just a physical level, but also spiritually. Shinto creation myth involved primordial god Izanagi traveling to the underworld in an effort to rescue his deceased wife Izanami, but he was horrified by her decayed zombie body and hauled ass without her, becoming tainted with the filth of death in the process, forcing him to wash himself with flowing water in a ritualistic cleansing now known as misagi. The fear of decay has been baked into Japanese culture since its inception, resulting in modern society doing things like favoring cremation over burial. Buddhism, on the other hand, often tries to come to terms with death as nature and not something humanity fights as an opposing force. Izanami is sometimes portrayed as an antagonist, furious at her husband for abandoning her and Japan, vowing to kill 1,000 souls every day. In response, Izanagi vowed to sire 1,500 new souls daily. This is in comparison to the Buddhist demon Mara, who tried to distract Buddha from his enlightenment by embodying fertility and the fear of death. Japan has been heavily influenced by Buddhism for centuries by the time Sekiro took place, and it continues to influence video game artists and developers today. The various headless enemies aren't reanimated zombies, they're the bodies of these blood-soaked warriors still kicking because of the karma they've racked up in their warrior career. Traditional Chinese medicine has only been practiced in Japan for the past 1500 years or so, and by the Sengoku period, it would have already been adapted into Japanese holistic medicine called Kampo. The two share a lot of similar practices, ingredients, and aspirations. This isn't the first From Software game that draws heavily from Buddhism. Dark Souls' stringent world of undeath is a rejection of Buddha's rebirth. Clinging onto your legacy in a bid for immortality is a classic example of hoarding attachments that prevent ascension. Bloodborne decided to further explore the time and madness angle of the same concept, while Sekiro went into the opposite direction to expand the death and karma side. When Wolf eats a sugar, strikes a corresponding pose, therefore imitating the warrior they're named after, he's taking upon himself some of their karma along with their powers. Our recipe won't have magical karma powers, but we can certainly infuse our candies with medicinal herbs. Candy making is complicated. If you're not using the right ingredients, temperature, or tools, it can be a real gamble. To ensure a properly brittle candy with a smooth appearance, our candy base will include corn syrup, because you need some sort of glucose-based syrup to inhibit the formation of crystals in the finished product. Obviously, corn syrup wouldn't have existed in Sengoku period Japan, so we're also going to include brown rice syrup, which is also an invert sugar but has a particular taste, color, and texture. A food thermometer is nigh on essential for candy making. A candy mixture takes a long while to reach the proper temperature, and there's no way to eyeball when said boiling goop is past the awkwardly sticky stage and properly into the hard crunch stage. But if it goes just a few degrees higher, it'll burn really quickly, resulting in an ugly brown color and a telltale burnt taste. Keep those tips in mind when you tackle any sort of candy recipe. Substitutes and workarounds do exist, but I honestly think it's easier to just get the proper tools and ingredients. So now that we've nailed down our ingredients and method, it's time to make our sugars. Our base candy recipe will include 3 3/4 cups of granulated raw cane sugar, 1 cup corn syrup, half a cup of brown rice syrup, 1 cup water, and confectioner sugar for dusting. For each sugar, they'll have their unique blend of flavorings. Fresh ginger slices and dried lotus seeds for Goku sugar, Angelica root and dried Astragalus for Akko sugar, ginseng and dried jujubes for Ungo sugar, dried Cocklebur fruit and 2 tablespoons of sake for Yashariku sugar, dried orange peel and dried goji berries for Gachiin sugar, and appropriate food coloring, a gel consistency preferred. Before we start, a necessary disclaimer. Those interested in consuming TCM ingredients must be responsible for any side effects that may happen. You should thoroughly research both the herbs and your supplier before you take them, especially if you have pre-existing health concerns like pregnancy, allergies, blood abnormalities, or are taking medication. This recipe only has a small concentration of medicine in each candy, but for some that's more than enough to cause problems, and the risk goes higher with each candy you eat. With that out of the way, begin by first boiling the 1 cup of water with the corresponding flavor ingredients. Essentially, we're making a batch of 10 to 20 candies with 1 flavor at a time to make things easier on us. Akko sugar requires you to boil sliced ginger and dried lotus seeds and so on. After the water has been properly infused with the medicinal ingredients, strain the water and add it to another pot with the rest of the candy-based ingredients, making sure the water still totals a cup, and you boil it all down until it reaches 300 degrees Fahrenheit. It'll take a while and you might notice a point where it seems like the temperature isn't rising anymore, but keep at it. All the water needs to be boiled away, but the flavor will remain. Once it reaches 300 degrees Fahrenheit, add the food coloring and then keep boiling until it reaches 310 degrees Fahrenheit. Then immediately take it off the heat and pour it into molds. After perhaps 2 hours, the candy should be completely set and cool, and you can tumble them into the powdered sugar to avoid sticking, and store or wrap the candies. Any mold method is going to give the candies a flat side, but a true disc-shaped candy requires factory standard molds that we don't have. We're not using natural food colorings because I tried my best to research natural alternatives that could retain their dye after boilings, and it was super hard, especially blue. Take it from me that Sekiro sugars shouldn't have been so brightly colored. Intensely colored food did exist, but it was with things like powdered dried beets and matcha. Boiling these ingredients rather than mixing it with dough or jelly will change the colors drastically, sometimes completely bleaching it or changing red to purple and so on. As for the various medicinal ingredients, I took a gander in my mom's soup making cabinet and took stock of the medicinal herbs we ourselves use in our lives. The ones included in this recipe are some of the more commonly used ingredients of modern TCM. Gokin sugar, as a posture-retaining consumable, is described as a popular choice among shinobi hunters, a job that requires a body with an unshakable core. Ginger and lotus seeds are great for restoring energy through chi, a person's life force. Ako sugar raises your attack power. This candy actually proved one of the hardest to find medicines for since, most medicine is about preserving your health. Astragalus root increases energy and resistance to stress, and Angelica root increases the flow of your bodily fluids, including blood. Ungo sugar reduces the amount of health wolf loses. Very protection-centric, so we're using ginseng for longevity and jujubes for their wound-healing properties. Both of these ingredients have some of the most well-known histories in Asian food culture. Yashariku sugar is a double-edged sword, since it reduces both your health and posture, so wolf can be super powerful for a little bit. You're gonna add sake to the candy mixture around the 300 Fahrenheit mark, and the dried cocklebur fruit is an immunity-boosting medicine, but the plant is mildly toxic and can cause diarrhea. So, wolf gets super powerful and aggressive when taking this candy because he needs to shit his brains out. Gachiin sugar makes you more stealthy, so use orange peel and goji berries to restore your vision, an irregular heart rate, and lower stress. Enjoy your candies. Pop them before tough situations like speaking before a big crowd or having to wait in line at the DMV. Tell your friends to stay away from the Simpo brand so you don't support their unethical practices. Thank you for joining this edition of Gamer Cooking Reciplore, and stay tuned for more in the future.